The year is 146 BCE. Carthage is burning. The city's last defenders have already fallen silent on the walls. In the choking smoke of dawn, you clutch your 3-year-old daughter listening as Roman steel pounds against your door. Each strike rattles through the wood like thunder. You know what's coming, and for the first time, death feels like mercy compared to what awaits. For centuries, when people think of Rome, they picture emperors draped in marble glory, the Colosseum filled with roaring crowds, or brilliant generals leading disciplined legions. But beneath the legend lies something rarely spoken aloud. Rome's true victories didn't come only from swords or strategy. They came from something colder, a program of psychological terror so refined it turned the destruction of families into a weapon of war. The fall of Carthage gives us the clearest window into this machinery. At dawn on May 29th, Roman forces under Scipio Aemilianus marched through the broken gates. What followed wasn't chaotic looting or drunken pillage. It was organized, deliberate, and terrifyingly efficient. Roman military handbooks called it the Harvest Protocol. Not just a strategy for conquest, but a step-by-step manual for processing entire populations like crops ready for collection. And the records they left behind don't read like stories of horror. They read like bureaucratic checklists. Within mere hours, Carthage's survivors, tens of thousands of men, women, and children, were herded into public squares. There, under the shadow of burning temples, they were sorted and catalogued with chilling precision. Adult males over 12 were executed, not in the chaos of battle, but in calm, methodical groups. Even boys as young as 6 could be condemned if they looked strong enough to resist later. Women and girls, however, faced another fate. They were placed into categories based on age, physical strength, and market value. Imagine mothers forced to watch their daughters marched into separate lines, knowing they would never see them again. Roman officers staged these scenes deliberately, because the suffering itself was the point. The Romans had learned something brutal. A traumatized people will surrender faster than a defeated army. And so, Carthage became not just a city destroyed, but a laboratory in the science of human despair. But Rome's destruction of Carthage didn't happen by accident. For over a decade, one man had been stoking the fire. His name was Marcus Porcius Cato, known as Cato the Elder. A senator so relentless that his obsession became legend. Every speech he gave in the Senate, no matter the topic, ended with the same chilling phrase: Carthage must be destroyed. Debating taxes? Carthage must be destroyed. Discussing road repairs? Carthage must be destroyed. At first, his colleagues laughed. But Cato wasn't a madman shouting into the void. He had been to Carthage with his own eyes, and what he saw terrified him. The city, once crippled by the Second Punic War, was thriving again. New markets bustled with trade, new buildings rose from the skyline, and its people were multiplying. Carthage was not dying. It was recovering. Legend says Cato returned with fresh figs plucked in Carthage, placing them before the Senate. Look at these, he warned, still fresh, from a city only 3 days' sail from Rome. Whether the story is fact or myth doesn't matter. The symbolism struck like lightning. Rome's leaders realized Carthage wasn't just an old rival. It was a threat reborn, and Cato's paranoia became policy. But revenge wasn't enough. Rome saw an opportunity. Carthage would be more than an enemy destroyed. It would be an experiment. For centuries, conquest had meant armies defeated, cities looted, and tribute demanded. But in 146 BCE, Rome prepared to go further. They wanted to see if a civilization could be erased completely, its people scattered, its culture obliterated, its very soil cursed. The Senate acted with chilling speed. A special commission of 10 senators was dispatched to Africa with one mandate: make sure Carthage could never rise again. Not militarily, not economically, not culturally. They arrived with instructions that read like a blueprint for civilizational murder. Every temple was to be burned, every building demolished, every citizen either executed or sold. The land itself was declared forbidden, cursed by decree. This was not rage. It was policy. Cold, calculated, written down, and voted on. Rome had decided to test whether an entire people could be permanently erased through systematic violence. And tragically, they were about to prove that it was possible. What followed in Carthage was less a massacre and more a system, a grim, industrial operation designed to turn people into paperwork. Within 48 hours, the Romans had catalogued roughly 50,000 survivors. Each person was given a category, a number, and in the case of women, a market value recorded in ledgers with the same column used for counting grain. Roman ships left ports loaded not only with silk and spices, but with human cargo listed in the same manifests. 20 bolts Damascus silk, 40 bags pepper, 15 females aged 16-20, excellent condition. Names were irrelevant. Ages, physical descriptions, and price estimates were all that mattered. Young women aged 14-25 were the most valuable category. Records show 4,200 were flagged in that bracket alone. This wasn't spontaneous violence. It relied on a legal and commercial infrastructure that turned human trafficking into a functioning industry. Commanders were rewarded for the quality and quantity of prisoners they brought home. Bonuses and prestige encouraged targeting civilians as profit centers rather than merely military foes. War trophies became property disputes with formal procedures. A widow's fate could be claimed, certified by 3 witnesses, and recorded in a military court within 72 hours. Transport was equally professional. Specialized vessels, retrofitted to hold people, crossed the Mediterranean like slow-moving prisons, ventilated cargo holds, water stores, and crude waste systems designed to keep human beings alive long enough to be sold. Captains kept meticulous logs, not of suffering, but of value depreciation, health decline, behavioral notes, expected price upon arrival. Mortality during voyages averaged around 15%, a figure treated as an acceptable loss on balance sheets. Those who died were thrown overboard and recorded alongside spoiled grain. Arrival in port meant another set of procedures. Cleaning, basic medical triage if the captive retained value, and final processing through receiving centers that resembled livestock inspection facilities. Any remaining personal items were destroyed in public ceremonies designed to sever identity and erase cultural markers. Names were ripped away and replaced with numbers or Latinized labels. This deliberate bureaucratic dehumanization wasn't a wartime lapse in morals. It was a policy innovation. Rome had refined slavery into a scalable, auditable system with rules, receipts, and measurable outcomes. Carthage exposed the terrifying logic. Efficiency could be applied to human suffering, and administration could make atrocity routine. But the Romans weren't satisfied with just breaking bodies. They wanted to break identities. Conquered women weren't only stripped of freedom, they were stripped of self. The process began in the ashes of Carthage with public humiliation ceremonies. Women were dragged into squares, forced to remove traditional clothing and jewelry before jeering soldiers. Religious icons and family heirlooms were burned in front of them, not for practicality, but for spectacle, a deliberate severing of cultural memory. This was the start of what Roman manuals called population processing. Facilities discovered by archaeologists in later Roman cities show specialized chambers with drainage systems and restraint mechanisms. Transformation centers designed not just to confine, but to re-engineer identity. Women spent months inside, subjected to systematic rape and forced pregnancy. Administrators calculated the timing precisely. 6 months was the optimal period to break resistance while still preserving economic value. The result wasn't just slaves. It was generations of children born as living proof of Roman dominance. These children, products of forced unions, carried Roman culture rather than Carthaginian memory, ensuring that even in bloodlines, the empire replaced what it had destroyed. The cruelty extended into the design of daily life. Rations were deliberately scarce not to save cost but to foster competition and mistrust among captives. Desperation became a tool, keeping women too fractured to resist collectively. Manuals even outlined best practices for psychological control, how to destroy dignity without damaging market value, how to instill fear without sparking rebellion. The horror lies not only in what was done, but in how calmly it was documented. These weren't crimes hidden in shame. They were written into law. Roman codes explicitly gave masters absolute rights over enslaved women's bodies, treating pregnancy as an economic asset. Records survive listing captives alongside livestock breeding schedules, as if human life were no different from animal husbandry. This wasn't chaos. This was order. Rome had turned the most intimate forms of suffering into a policy function of empire. The destruction of Carthage wasn't just about eliminating an enemy. It was about testing whether trauma itself could be weaponized, and Rome discovered the answer was yes. Carthage was not the end of Rome's cruelty. It was the beginning of a template, a model for empire that would be exported across the Mediterranean. Only months after Carthage burned, Roman legions under Lucius Mummius descended on Corinth in Greece. The pattern was identical. The men slaughtered, the women and children enslaved, the city reduced to rubble. Rome had learned that organized brutality didn't just conquer enemies, it erased them. Over the following decades, this Carthaginian blueprint reappeared again and again. In Spain at Numantia in 133 BCE, Scipio Aemilianus himself applied the same tactics. The siege dragged on until the starving inhabitants chose mass suicide rather than fall into Roman hands. Why? Because word of what had happened at Carthage had spread like wildfire. Entire populations preferred death to Roman processing. The pattern became most infamous during the Jewish wars. In 70 CE, after Jerusalem fell, nearly 97,000 survivors were captured. The historian Josephus recorded how women and children were paraded through the streets before being scattered as slaves across the empire. The Arch of Titus in Rome still shows these captives, displayed like temple treasures, living trophies of conquest. But the most devastating echo of Carthage came decades later, after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE. Roman forces under Emperor Hadrian killed an estimated 600,000 people. Survivors were so numerous that slave prices collapsed. Ancient sources describe men, women, and children sold cheaper than horses, markets overflowing with human lives. And then came the final blow. Judea was erased from the map. The province was renamed Syria Palestina, a deliberate attempt to wipe out Jewish identity and connection to their homeland. Just as Carthage's soil was cursed, Jewish memory itself was targeted. What Rome discovered in Carthage was chilling, that fear could travel faster than armies. Cities across the Mediterranean built underground hiding places, caves, and tunnels specifically to protect women and children when Roman banners appeared on the horizon. Parents scarred their daughters' faces to make them less valuable to slavers. Communities reshaped marriage customs, rushing girls into unions to reduce their market worth. Rome had perfected the art of ruling not just through conquest, but through terror engraved into memory. The scars Rome left behind weren't just physical, they rewired entire civilizations. Across the Mediterranean, fear of Roman capture changed the way people lived. Villages built secret cave systems, tunnels, and forest refuges where women and children could vanish the moment Roman troops appeared. Archaeologists have uncovered these networks from Britain to North Africa, proof that survival itself had been redesigned around Rome's cruelty. Even family life was reshaped. In some regions, parents deliberately scarred their daughters' faces, burns, cuts, or markings designed to lower their value to Roman slavers. It was a desperate strategy, a way of saying better disfigured than stolen. Other communities rushed girls into early marriages, believing pregnancy or widowhood might shield them from being claimed as war trophies. Languages themselves absorbed new vocabulary, words that didn't exist before Rome but were invented to describe specific types of brutality: forced separation, ritual humiliation, systematic rape. Trauma carved its way into the very grammar of conquered peoples, but perhaps the most chilling legacy lies in the records Rome left behind. The empire documented everything with meticulous precision. Bills of sale, ship manifests, and processing forms sit preserved in archives, not hidden like shameful secrets but stored proudly, alongside tax receipts and military reports. To Rome, this wasn't atrocity. It was administration. One surviving ledgerless shipment side by side, 40 bags of peppercorns, 15 Carthaginian women, excellent condition. The indifference is what freezes the blood. Rome didn't just conquer bodies, it standardized suffering until human lives were indistinguishable from cargo. The result was a system that future empires would study, copy, and refine. Rome showed that terror could be engineered, measured, and scaled. That fear could travel faster than legions, softening cities long before armies arrived. And that the most efficient conquest wasn't of armies or walls, but of families, of mothers and children. Reduced to entries in an imperial ledger, behind the marble statues and grand monuments, Rome's empire stood on this foundation. a machine of bureaucratic dehumanization so effective it reshaped not only those it conquered, but the very survival strategies of entire civilizations. The story of Carthage doesn't end in ruins. It ends in silence. A silence engineered by Rome to echo through centuries. Within 2 days of the city's fall, 50,000 survivors had been reduced to numbers, their names erased, their families shattered. Within a generation, their culture was gone, their land cursed, their memory deliberately buried beneath Roman victory. And yet, the evidence still whispers from the archives: bills of sale, cargo lists, military manuals, documents that treat human beings with the same cold precision as grain shipments or weapon stockpiles. To the Romans, this wasn't shameful. It was efficiency. A successful policy implementation. That's what makes Carthage so haunting. It wasn't destroyed by wild rage or uncontrollable violence. It was destroyed by men in togas, sitting in marble halls drafting policies with ink and parchment. Administrators who saw themselves not as monsters but as civil servants, doing their jobs with Roman discipline. That's why the Carthage model spread. It was easy to replicate because it lived not in the emotions of soldiers, but in the procedures of empire. The destruction of Carthage became the proof of concept. From Greece to Judea, the same methods reappeared: the executions, the separations, the erasures of culture and memory. Rome had discovered that the surest path to control wasn't gratitude, it was trauma. And once inflicted, trauma governed generations more effectively than any legion ever could. Today, we remember Rome for its architecture, its roads, its laws. But beneath the marble and stone lies another legacy: the cold transformation of human suffering into a tool of governance. The women of Carthage, and the countless others who followed, weren't just victims of conquest. They were the foundation stones upon which Rome's empire was built, and that is the truth hidden in the archives. Civilizations can be broken not only by fire and steel, but by paperwork and policy. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, share this video, because behind every monument to Roman greatness stands a forgotten voice waiting to be heard.